Today, I'm going to explore the world of a Game of Thrones. Actually, I'm going to explore it through a Game of Thrones, the card game. This is the second edition. There was a first edition that came out from Fantasy Flight Games. And then Fantasy Flight, as what they did with a lot of their card games, which were kind of collectible card games, they converted them into a system or series called the Living Card Game (LCG). So instead of it just being completely, random, like random packs like you might have with Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, they made it into a set series. So when you buy a pack or booster box, they came in like packs of 60. You were to get 3 copies of every card, and so you would get 20 cards and 3 copies of each card. And they did that for a lot of their different card-based games. Fantasy Flight has several different card-based games. They've had Warhammer and Cthulhu, and actually a couple of different Cthulhu type systems, and had Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. And again, this is Game of Thrones, the card game second edition. And it is based on the book series Game of Thrones. As you can see here, there is there's 5 books in the series, starting off with the Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. And Mr. Martin got up to book 5 and kind of hit a dry spell. And during that time, the TV series came out, which you might several of you might be more familiar with the TV series than with the book series. But the TV series basically followed the book series. I mean, it reduced it for TV, right? Because the book series, I mean, there are these books are relatively long. There's a lot of characters, and you can't. In a TV series, it's really almost impossible to keep up with that many characters and plot lines in a TV series. We just don't have that kind of attention span. So, so some of the plots and the characters were merged and reduced and what have you. So, but for the first, at least I would say the first 3 seasons, pretty close to the books, but they didn't follow it book by book. I mean, by the time they got to season 3, they were already into stuff that happened in books 4 and possibly even 5. So, in my opinion, about season 4 or 5, they were kind of in new territory. They were kind of making it up on their own. So that's one of the interesting issues with Game of Thrones is the TV series, or the HBO series actually went kind of took the series and the plot line and the characters to a different direction over 8 seasons than maybe where the books were taking them, or where George R.R. Martin would have taken them if he had written. I think he was planning on doing 2 more books, and so now what does he do? Does he write those 2 more books the way he wanted to, or is he inspired or influenced, or is it now lore of what the TV series has done or the HBO series has done? You kind of have a fork in the road. Normally, the movie and the TV usually takes a different adaptation of the books, and here they might trump or preempt where the books would go if he ever does finish writing out this series, which at this point, who knows? I mean, he's already doing some prequels and some other stuff in this space. So Game of Thrones, the card game, though, however, basically follows the books for the most part. I mean, it's based on the books. There is a Game of Thrones, the card game, that is based, that has imagery from the movies. It's kind of a basic set. but it was just imagery from the movies, but it was I think the gameplay was relatively the same. It might have been a little bit more simplified version of this, but this is really following off from the books. Now, as they do extra sets, who knows? I haven't followed this as closely to know if they've started adapting some of the sets into what the TV series did or the HBO series did. However, I don't know if this is still active. In fact, some of the stuff I've been picking up from this has been kind of on clearance or bargains or what have you, and so I don't know if this series is still as active as in the Fantasy Fight fold. So, but with that, that's my introduction to the Game of Thrones kind of universe in this game. But let's talk a little bit about the card game, second edition. So, what is a Game of Thrones the card game? At least the second edition. Now, there are a few differences between the first and second edition. I've primarily played the second edition almost exclusively, so I only know how the second edition plays and and I really don't know what all the differences are. I know they changed up the art a little bit and they changed up a little bit of the formatting, but for the most part, I think it's somewhat of the same game. But as I said in the intro, this game is, I don't know if this is still being supported, so you're really going to be hard pressed to find the first edition or the original edition, and you might have a hard time finding the second edition. But enough of that. Let's get into the second edition. So it's a card game at its heart. You're going to have different cards that you're going to be using in the game or playing within the game. You'll be representing a faction, and these are all tied to the primary factions that are in the Game of Thrones book series. And so like this one is the Starks here. So you have their faction, and you'll have the Lannisters and all the Baratheons and all the other different factions are represented as well. To start out the game, if you get this starter box here, which is allows you to play 2 to 4 players in the box. It has enough to play a game, but it's kind of limited because you really need to start buying some of the other packs, and they come in. A lot of times, for a lot of the packs come in something that looks kind of like this, which are kind of have a little bit of a theme to it, and we'll have, as I said, we'll have 20 cards, 3 of each type in that pack. There are some bigger or boxes of kind of this same size or pretty close to it that like might add a more robust offering for a certain faction, and other cards for some of the other factions, but it might focus really on one faction or another, and so you that was another way to kind of bolster your collection and pick up cards, because this is, at its heart, it is kind of a deck building game, not deck building during the game, but pre-deck building game. You're going to be putting all your cards together before you play the game, and then trying out that deck and see how that plays against another opponent or a group of opponents, because this game does have relatively strong multiplayer rules built into it. So in that regard, it's kind of like, again, more like a collectible card game like Magic the Gathering or Pokemon, where you're pre-building your deck and then trying that out against others. So you need to have an inventory of other cards to really hone your decks to their maximum efficiency. So what are some of the cards you're going to have? Well, basically you're going to have, there's 2 decks that you're primarily going to use during the game. There's the deck you build with all your characters and primary cards that are tied to your faction. And that will have cards of your faction and neutral cards. There are some neutral cards in the game that you can add to your faction, but for the most part, you're probably going to be focusing on cards of your faction. And then you're going to have plot cards. There are plot cards that are tied to your faction. So these are stark plot cards, and there are also neutral plot cards as well. Now, what do they do? They have some special effects or events, like when revealed. This has you're going to select a plot card at the beginning of your turn, flip it over. So when this is revealed, you'll follow those requirements. But then the plot card also tells you how much gold you're going to get this turn. Gold is a resource with which to buy your cards or play your cards, and other resources. The next number is the initiative. So the higher the initiative that person gets to determine who goes first this round. Sometimes you want to go first. Sometimes you want to see what the other side's going to do. So that's the initiative, and there are tiebreakers tied to that if it's equal. And the last number is the effectiveness of your claim. There's going to be several challenges in this game. And that's kind of where the conflict happens, and this is the effect of that. So, like if you do a strength challenge or a military challenge, and defeat somebody, this is how many characters they have to lose and take out of the game. So that number, if that number is really high, and you do a military challenge, you're going to knock out several characters if you're successful. So that's just the effect of your challenges or your claims during that turn, and then of course the gold and initiative as well. And as I said, there are neutral ones, and there are also faction specific ones as well. You're going to create a deck of plot cards. I believe it's like 7, and then play those, and then if you run out of plot cards, then you'll just shuffle and keep playing until someone wins. The way you win the game is collecting these, which are power tokens, and the first one to 15 wins the game. And there's a few ways to get those during the game. Sometimes there are special abilities on cards that get them, but this is kind of the key to the game. These are like the victory points of the game. You also have influence tokens that come into the game, and again, you have the gold. So these are basically most of the components that you're going to have in the game. Then you have the cards, which are the heart of the game. Let's go a little bit closer here so we can see some of these. So you're going to have location cards. You're going to have character cards in the game. So there's a lot of characters here. You're going to have attachments, and you can tell what it is by it's kind of small print, but up here in the corner. And then you also have events in the game. And you decide how you want to build your deck and put things together and figure out of what are the combos or what are the synergies between the cards. But you're going to have, characters are probably the most prevalent of the kind of cards, because they're the ones that kind of drive everything forward. They're going to have a cost in there. That's kind of your gold cost. Then they're going to have some of these symbols here, and these are for the different challenges that might come up. You have strength, intrigue, and power, and strength, and the strength token that comes into play in the military challenges. Again, back to if you're successful, you're going to have the effect of the claim on your plot card that you chose. So strength is all about attacking and taking out characters from the other side. Intrigue makes people discard cards, so it's a way to limit someone's hand and kind of limit their choices of what they can play and how they can play it. And power is just that; it's about power, and that's kind of the key to the game, is getting some of these these power tokens to win the game. And so the characters are very themed to it. So characters in the book series that were fighters and warriors and knights, they're probably going to have a strength token, right? Or strength symbol on their card. If they're more of the thinking type and the Tyrion type, their intrigue is probably going to be more. They're going to have that symbol on there, and then power are for characters that that affect the overall power situation of the realm. They also have a value too. So like this is the strength value for this character. I mean that's pretty high. So that you have to have the symbol is for the challenge, but also the value as well. Plus they have keywords that are going to be on here, and special rules for this. Like for this right here, they can have no attachments, if you can see that. And then it has a reaction here. This one has a keyword of stealth, and so there's a lot of keywords in this. And so the overall gameplay is not that complex. However, just like with any, collectible card game or living card game, the devil's in the details. And so all these special rules and keywords that are on the cards, that's what leads to the complexity, because although the rules might be relatively, or the gameplay mechanics and rules might be relatively simple, it's these cards break those rules. They change things, they augment, they make things different, and so that's where the complexity is, the interaction of all these special keywords and abilities and how they interact with cards that you have on your side and cards on the other side as well. Renowned is a big keyword, and that helps you, get power at certain areas. Of course, true to the books, with all the different characters, there's going to be, the characters that you read in the books, and there might be different versions of them. Like some of these might have come in the, kind of in the basic set when you first get it, but then once you buy those packs or those boxes that augment different factions, you might get different versions of these characters as well. And there's a little symbol right there showing that this is unique, so you can only have one aria on the board at a time. But you have Arya Stark, Eddard Stark, Maester Luwin, Jon Snow. We have to have Jon Snow, right? Robb Stark. So you have all your famous characters here. Then you have Shaggy Dog, which is a character, but then you have Lady here, which is an attachment. And attachments are different. Attachments might be like this case a direwolf. Attachment could be like a minor character. Attachment could be a weapon or something like that. So that they are attachments. They're not a character by themselves. They get attached to a character, and they might suffer the same fate as that character. That character gets removed from play, then you might lose the attachment as well. It depends on, sometimes the attachments do things differently. And there's also events that you play, which you're going to be playing those out of your hand, and they do something different, but they're not going to live on the board. Characters and attachments and locations are going to stay on the board after you play them. There's also some thematic attributes of the game, like when a character is upright, it's standing. But it also could be in a situation of where you can't really use its abilities, or its abilities are exhausted. It's kneeling. That's something that kind of comes up in the game. Kneel. You're supposed to kneel before the king and kneel before the stronger powers and stuff like that. So that's a basic overview of the cards. And I'm not going to really go into all of the gameplay here. There's much better videos out there that talk about gameplay and the like. But I will kind of just go through this Learn to Play. There's a Learn to Play book, and there's also a rules reference. So basically they suggest you go through this Learn to Play to learn how to play the game, and then after you've kind of went through this and it kind of walked you through gameplay, then you go to the rules reference to refer back to all the different details. So the rules reference itself has an index here, is 32 pages long. So a little bit, for a rule booklet, golly, 32 pages. That pales in comparison to, or that's minor compared to the rule book for Magic the Gathering. Of course, nobody even downloads that thing anymore, but it's quite voluminous. And a lot of pages. But so this is the rule reference that goes to, like, if you want to know about like kneeling, or want to know about cost, or the dead pile, or event cards, or effects, or duplicates. You can go here and read up a little bit more about it and say, okay, that makes sense. But to get started and play the game, you can just follow this Learn to Play guide here. Talks about the different kind of cards and the different tokens you're going to have. It shows what the play area is going to look like. Talks about game setup here. and key concepts in your phase. You're going to have your plot, your draw, your marshalling. Marshalling is putting cards on the board, paying their cost and putting cards off. I didn't even see that there. I did a flick of the gold there. Paying the cost. Challenges, and again, those challenges, as we talked about before, you have a military challenge, intrigue challenge, and power challenge. And those are going to be the effect of those are going to be key to the ability of the plot card that was chosen for that round, or what you chose for that round. This is to kill opponents. This is to, military challenge. Intrigue challenges are to discard cards and kind of control someone's hand and limit their choices. And power challenge is, the goal of the power challenge is to get these, which are the victory points. The first one to 15 of these, wins the game. And so the challenges are really the heart of the game. I mean, you need to draw cards to see what you have in your hand. Oh, and that's another thing I didn't mention here. The amount of cards you could have in your hand it varies from turn to turn. So if you played this plot card, you could have 5 cards in your hand. If you see that little 5 right there. So the plot cards really set the stage for the game. It's almost like a kind of a storytelling, like in one of the books. This is the chapter, right? So this is going to set the tone for what's going on in this chapter. The gold, your initiative, the claim value, and any kind of special effects, and then, of course, how many cards you can have in your hand as well. So then you have martial, you have the challenges, then you have dominance, and so that's determined by who has the most strength, and dominance will yield more of these, which are important. Like when you do a power challenge, I forgot to mention, when power challenges, you remove these from your opponent, so that's a way to kind of keep the balance there. Dominance gets you the power tokens based on strength and overall dominance. You have standing. That means standing the cards back up. Remember you said you had the kneeling, which they're kind of used or exhausted, and you can. There's other things that can affect you to make you kneel. There's cards that make you kneel, but when you use a card, it typically kneels as well, and then you can stand them back up so you can get ready them for the next round, and then you do taxation. Which is kind of a way that some of the money is managed over the game. And so those are basically the 7 phases you're going to do. You're going to rinse and repeat that until someone gets 15 of those, and that is basically the game at a very, very high level. You can't play the game based on this, but yeah. And as I said, taxation, one of the things is, you can't hold gold over, well, most of the time, there are certain cards that might let you keep gold, but for the most part, you have to return all unspent gold. So whatever you get from your plot card or from any of your other cards, sometimes locations give you gold, it's use it or lose it. So you want to use it all up to buy cards, to marshal cards, and then whatever you have left over, unless you have a special card that does that or ability, you're going to return all unspent gold, and then you check your reserve, and that's that you're looking at you compare hand size and stuff like that. So anyway, that's more of a taxation is kind of an administrative cleanup phase. Between phase 6 and 7 is kind of cleanup for the round. So there you have it. And again, this does play well as a multiplayer game with all the different factions. And if you want to do that, there's also there are the different titles. You remember the Small Council or the King's Council. They're the different titles, like the Hand of the King. You can play a game and hand out those titles to the different players, and those add special abilities. And so there's and the original version of this, I think the first edition, they actually had little minis that came with it. I almost tried to go out and buy one of the first edition starter boxes just because I wanted to get those minis, and like they have the Hand of the King and all that other stuff. But it was pretty pricey, and I can never really find it at a bargain. But you don't really need it for this. There's cards that represent it in this set. But there you have it. The strength of this game is it's relatively thematic. I mean, the mechanics of this game really do fit with the books. And the movie series for that, the TV series for that matter, because the TV series was really a implementation of the books. but it's very thematic. You got the characters; they kind of do their abilities and attributes are kind of tied to what they would do in what they did in the books, or I mean, there's always subject to argument. Well, this person should be stronger or whatever, but they feel pretty close to what those characters would do in the books, and so and the different abilities and the way you get power and the way you hold power and the different challenges, it's all very thematic and feels like you're recreating some of the plot intrigues of the books, because Game of Thrones is, even though it's kind of in fantasy, and I'm doing this on a Sci-Fi fantasy Saturday for you all, because there's dragons and there's some magic. It's really not high fantasy. It's kind of what I would call maybe low fantasy. Maybe fantasy is there, but it's not driving the story. Yeah, sure, the dragons are pretty important, and they do quite a bit, or a pretty meaningful mid to late part of the books and definitely the series. However, most of this game is really a political intrigue. The George R. R. Martin credits the War of the Roses as part of his inspiration for writing the books, and so it's a lot of political intrigue and relatives, related people, or very small family trees fighting against each other and fighting within those houses and fighting against the other powerful houses and all the politics and intrigue that goes along with that. That is what's at the heart of the books and what is at the heart of this game. But there's a good fair amount of combat, with the military challenges, and of course the dominance at the end. Strength is an important aspect, and kind of might makes right at the end of the day in a lot of these instances. But a strong intrigue strategy is very effective as well. So anyway, so that's the good of it. The bad of it is it's a living card game, meaning that you've got to buy quite a bit of this if you really want to see how some of these characters flesh out, or see how some of these plot lines flesh out, or see how some of these factions really develop and get the good characters or the good cards. You got to get quite a few number of these to really get a feel for that, or to have more choices. And so that's kind of the downside with any collectible card game. Now, you don't get random packs, so they've eliminated that aspect. You know exactly what you're getting when you buy one of these packs, but you still need to go buy them to get more to build your decks. So that is, my introduction to A Game of Thrones, the card game, 2nd edition. As I mentioned in the intro, that they did come out with a version of Game of Thrones, the card game, that was tied to the movie series, or the TV series, I should say, the HBO. I keep calling it a movie series because it feels like a movie, but and better than a lot of movies. But they came out with a version that was more of an introductory version of Game of Thrones, the card game, and it was tied to the TV series. This is that set, and I think that's all they came out with, was just this set. So very limited on the number of cards, and the cards themselves were all tied to the imagery of the series itself. So you had these like the banners. You just had the Starks and the Lannisters, and this is where you keep track of your power tokens. You know, when you get power tokens, you put it on there, and of course, when you get to 15, you win. But the cards themselves, they play somewhat the same way. You know, you have your plot cards with, of course, the gold and the initiative and the claim value and any kind of special ability, but the imagery was from the series. So it's basically, screenshots from the series. And so you've got some live action stuff here, but these are actually some of the neutral cards here. These are the plot cards that you get with the game. With this game, cards were fine, really glossy, but it was all screenshots, right? It's all from the TV series. So you can see that the formatting's a little bit different on this, as far as how they lined out the different abilities and what have you. But it's all from the series. There's Eddard Stark, and I should go back and look and see what. If they kept the same exact attributes or not. I know that he had renowned, and I think he was a 3. But anyway, this was more of a kind of an introductory version. So you had limited number of cards. It was all based on the live stills from the series themselves. Oops, Eddard Stark's gone. Spoiler alert. But you've got all the different characters in here, and there's multiple copies, of course, in there as well. And you got the Stark symbol up at the top here. So this one right here is a neutral character, it looks like. This one has the Stark faction up at the top there. So there's Varys, and you got some locations here. So it was all based on the cards or based on characters and imagery from the TV series itself. So let's take a look at some of the Lannisters here. A whole bunch of plot cards. So I got a whole bunch of plot cards here. And I think you could probably interchange some of these if you wanted to, and probably I don't know why I had those there. And with the other set, but it just looks different because this is all still shots from the show, and the other is all illustrated. And I do like the art that they have in the base game, the Game of Thrones, the card game. This one, if you really are just a huge fan of the movie, then the TV series, I said it again, then this is probably, you might want to play with this. This is, I think, was kind of an introduction to the series. It's not as robust. I think it generally plays the same way, but you're very limited on cards. And so this was more of a, if you like the TV series and you played with these cards, you're like, well, I need to get into this. I want to get into more. And so you might go into the full set. Now, I don't know if they intended to release other cards and try to have this have its own life based on the series as opposed to the books, which is what the card game is based on. But this is all I know that they released. I don't know if they ever came out with anything more than just this right here. So, kind of a missed opportunity there, or maybe it didn't do well. I don't know. But there you have it. That is Game of Thrones. Just Game of Thrones. Doesn't say the card game, but it basically is the card game. Yeah, there's a picture of that's the original first edition Game of Thrones, the card game. That's kind of the imagery, and you can see they kind of changed the formatting a little bit from that to the second edition. But anyway, there you have it. And then I've got all my cards in a box like this. So if you buy a lot of stuff over time, and I sleeve it because this is a card game. You're going to be shuffling and pulling cards and dealing cards quite a bit, so I end up sleeving these. But I have all mine by the different factions in here, and quite a bit of stuff in here. Again, I don't know if they still support this. So I don't even know if this is it, and if I need to start just buying out the rest of it through clearance sales and what have you. Anyway, that is my take on a Game of Thrones, the card game. Love to know your thoughts on this. I kind of did this as a setup because I'm probably going to do more stuff on Game of Thrones, not only the card game, because if you spoiler alert, you kind of saw a pack I need to unwrap or crack open from this wrap, the plastic wrap there. But I also might do some other game. There's quite a bit of Game of Thrones games out there, and so I might go into those. In fact, there's the Game of Thrones, the board game, is an excellent game, and I'll probably cover that and its primary expansion. It's got a few expansions, but I've got the second edition of that, and it has a really large expansion that I probably can't do an unboxing. I guess I could, because I might have an extra copy of that might find its way into a giveaway. Spoiler alert. But so I'm probably going to end up creating a playlist of just Game of Thrones stuff, and I'll put all this stuff there. But I want to do this as a setup for some more Game of Thrones stuff, and also going into this card game, because I really do like this card game. My son and I played this quite a bit, and we did enjoy it. Anyway, that's what I have for you today. Thanks again so much for stopping by. I know your time is important, and any amount of time you spend with me, I know it was a tough choice you had to make. So thank you, and take care. Thanks for watching.